"I'll tell you," said Harry, smiling at the other three students who had loyally followed him, ignoring Ron's raised eyebrows and Hermione's defensive fists on hips pose. "We need their help, guys. But can we just close the door first?" From the doorway Tabitha pulled herself back and stood tall, flattening herself against the basalt walls of the corridor. It was defensive, she knew, and originating from her mole background. Luna Lovegood, the student who had come to close the door, would no more be able to see her than Dolores Umbridge would be able to win Witch Universe, the controversial annual beauty contest. When the door clicked shut, Tabitha moved nearer the door and, removing her wand from her robe, 9 3/4 inch, pine with Vela hair core, pointed it at the keyhole. "Amplificato," she whispered as loud as she dared, pressing the handle part of the wand to her ear. Suddenly the conversation, otherwise silenced by the thick oak door, sprang to life like a car radio coming out of a transmission blackout. "Know where the Horcruxes are. They need to be put back together if the Order's plan is to succeed. Harry, Luna and Neville don't know about the Order." Hermione glanced suspiciously at the named wizards before looking doubtfully at Harry. He nodded gratefully at his friend's observation. "We are going to the Ministry," he continued. "I'm going to need all the help I can get to find Snape. Who'll give me the potion? I have to take it at the same time as the Horcruxes are reunited for it all to work." "Then we're with you, Harry," insisted Neville. "We'll do whatever it takes." "Thanks, guys," Harry nodded. "So that was the plan," thought Tabitha, staring at the large stone slabs that lined the corridor. "Well, good luck to them. She certainly wasn't to be the one to stop them. I've arranged with Hagrid for 3 brooms to be in the owlery for us to use. We were hoping Fred and George would be here, so if it all went belly up they could disappear at us. We'll go a little slower with 2 to a broom." "So, we're going to the Ministry," recapped Luna. "And, what'll we do there?" "We'll face Voldemort, that's what we'll do there." Ron's voice was so loud that it made Tabitha drop her wand in shock. "Look. All of this. It's very dangerous. I am prepared to do this on own, if necessary. If you have any doubts at all about Dash." All jerked their heads in the direction of the door as Tabitha Penright stood firm, now as visible as she was determined. "Pallid," Ron began, before blushing beetroot red at addressing her using their cruel nickname. "Professor Penright!" exclaimed Hermione as Harry stepped towards her. "We were just, he faltered under Tabitha's stare. "You were just planning your transport to the Ministry of Magic in order to join Albus Dumbledore in his latest scheme to rid the world of you-know-who. You will not succeed. I can help you." Standing as she was in the doorway, it was the words of a slighted witch rather than the offer of information that would in the end prevent them from delaying their venture permanently. The students before her remained silent, varying expressions of defiance on their faces. "You will tell me everything, Mr. Potter, or I will have no choice but to go to the headmistress. Tell me the spell you are to use to eliminate he who must not be named. I know that there is one. Every vanishing spell accompanied by a potion has one." Still no one answered, but this time, the other 5 students were looking at him questioningly. Even to Ron and Hermione, Harry had never mentioned the spell. "It's an unforgivable curse," Harry conceded. "Look, how did you know? How did you find us?" "She's a Mysteria. They're very special," said Ron. Tabitha glared at him before deciding to save face by taking it as a compliment. "So if it's all the same to you, Professor, we'll be going now," Harry concluded. All of the students moved towards the door. As they approached, Tabitha Penright raised her wand. They stopped, and stared. But it wasn't at her whom the students were looking. Tabitha realized soon enough as a wand was pressed between her shoulder blades that there was someone behind her. "Draco!" exclaimed Hermione. The Slytherin nodded in acknowledgement and maneuvered the Mole Studies teacher to one side, gesturing with his hand towards the open door. "Thank you," said Harry as they passed. "I am most grateful." Draco shook his head. "You're welcome. We're quits now." At his words Harry stopped, looking confused. "Quits?" Hermione and Ron stopped too, as did Neville, Luna, and Ginny. All 6 of the students looked at him, watching Draco's expression change from impassiveness to one of remorse. "I had knowledge and informed on the Mole to her." Draco jerked his head in Tabitha's direction and immediately the 6 students in front of her fixed her with stares. "I'm sorry she's dead though. I didn't know that's what the Ministry were going to do when I told them. I got the information the Dark Lord needed but Voldemort punished me anyway. It wasn't good enough. I'm not going to keep you, but you must know. He knows what to expect at the Ministry and he's prepared to win this time." "Harry, do you know what you're doing?" Hermione looked between him and Draco in alarm. "It's probably a one-way ticket if you all go," added Draco. Harry glanced at him before turning to Hermione. "We're coming with you," replied Ron loyally. "I have to make my own decision, Ron. Hermione. I have to go. It's up to you whether you come too." "Well said," commented Draco quietly. "No!" shrieked Ginny. "Harry. Don't die. Ginny, I want you to stay here." "That is to say, Ron and I do." He took a few steps towards her and kissed her on the cheek. The girl inclined her head towards him and closed her eyes before stepping away from Harry and the rest of the group. "I will not feel any different to any of you if you stay," Harry continued, looking at his friends. "I am going now." Harry began to move. So did Hermione and Ron, Neville and Luna. Tabitha made to go too. There were errors in the owlery. If the children got up there they would have a lot of explaining to do. As she moved, Draco Malfoy swung round in front of her. "Wait." He kept his wand trained on Tabitha and the 5 students stopped too, looking towards Draco and Tabitha. "The Dark Lord has a spy in the Department of Mysteries. A Mysteria." Tabitha stopped, her mouth opening in shock. "And who do you suspect it?" she broke off, reading the answer from Draco Malfoy's face. "No. I'm no traitor. Listen," she called over to the students. "Listen to me. If you get to the owlery without being seen, then tell any Auror you meet that I've given you permission. I'll back you." She looked at Draco, who had narrowed his eyes, and then back at the students. All of them were now giving her a mistrustful look. "And Draco gave you information about Mrs. Frobisher?" asked Ron, echoing their thoughts. "Were you behind her death?" Tabitha said nothing. Instead she prepared herself to walk past Draco Malfoy. Whether the children wanted to believe her or not, she was on their side and prepared to help them, despite the ignominy of her predicament. Immobilis. Immediately the world in the immediate vicinity of Tabitha Benright became thick and viscose, as if she were trying to walk through thick treacle. She saw Malfoy turn and look at Harry and his friends, glancing at Ron and nodding in confirmation at his assertion. "That was totally unnecessary," scolded Hermione, frowning at Draco. "Don't you think we're going to be in enough trouble?" "Harry, go," said Draco, ignoring Hermione. "Go and defeat the Dark Lord. He's ruined my life, though not as much as he's ruined yours, I dare say. Go." "No!" shouted Ginny, tearing over to the group. "You're going anyway? Even after what he just told you? Even though you know who is ready and waiting?" She shook her head incredulously. "Draco, can you fight? Are you willing to fight?" Draco nodded his head at Harry. The 5 Gryffindors stared at him in amazement. But Harry was too preoccupied in the near future to realize the significance of inviting Draco Malfoy to fight with them against Voldemort and the Death Eaters. Hermione nudged Harry and leaned towards him. "His father," she whispered, loud enough for Draco to hear. Neville and Ron nodded too. "I'll sort it all out here, Harry. I'll make it well." Thinking back to that moment, none of the young witches and wizards in the Mole Studies classroom that afternoon could definitely say who made the first move. Did Harry step towards Draco first, or was it Draco Malfoy who went first? Nevertheless, it resulted in something that neither of them believed would ever happen in a million years. They shook hands. "Go," Draco urged. "The quicker you go, the less chance they have of stopping you." "I'm coming too," said Ginny defiantly as the quintet began to step one by one out into the teaching corridor. Tabitha watched as Harry stepped back, looking at Ginny in a way that made the girl's emphatic stand ebb away to nothing. And then, to everyone's astonishment, Harry pulled Ginny closer to him, giving her a knee-melting, heart-stopping kiss. Time stood still. "Please stay." And then restarted. Ginny nodded at Harry's words as tears sprang to her eyes, and she followed the students out, tearing down the teaching corridor in the other direction. Tabitha could do nothing other than watch the unfolding scene, slowly becoming more annoyed and agitated at her immobile state. Draco Malfoy turned from the door from where he had been watching the 5 students make a run for it, stalking towards her menacingly. "I have you now, traitor," he began, holding his wand at throat height. And then, just when Tabitha began to believe that her number was well and truly up, their wand that Malfoy was holding span away across the stone-flagged floor, clattering in its transition. "Stand away from that teacher, Mr. Malfoy. Libracopus." Severus Snape was standing in the doorway, green-purple sparks from the spell crackling along the floor and around Tabitha Penwright. As she began to readjust to being free of the immobilist charm, Snape made his way towards her, turning his head towards a recoiling Draco. "I will deal with you later." "They've gone," said Tabitha, striding up to Snape and addressing him as matter-of-factly as she could in an attempt to regain what little pride she had left. "Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, Ron Weasley, Neville Longbottom, Luna Lovegood." She strode out onto the teaching corridor and began to race in the direction that the students had taken. Snape followed her, and quickly caught up with her. "They've gone to the Ministry, to the Department of Mysteries," said Tabitha, answering Snape's unspoken question and ignoring the danger of picking up his thoughts as they hurried towards the quadrangle. "Come on then," growled Snape as she paused to consider the route to take, guiding her elbow in the direction of the owlery. "It's your department, Tabitha." But it was all for nothing. From the right of the owlery there were already 3 brooms aloft, 2 of them carrying a double load. The students were getting away. "Accio," Snape pulled her down the scree slope a little towards Hagrid's hut. "What type is your broom, Miss Penwright?" "Nimbus 1500, Tabitha replied, glad that the darkness of the summer's evening would veil her embarrassment. "Accio Nimbus 1500. Within seconds her broom, which she was now grateful that she had ridden to Hogwarts all those months ago, was hovering 3 feet from the ground awaiting its passenger. "Come on," insisted Snape as he slipped onto the front of the broomstick as she made a clumsy attempt to slip onto the delicate handle and he held out his hand. "I can manage." Tabitha cut back, regaining her footing on the uneven ground, but she took his arm anyway. They soon became airborne and Snape banked her low performance modeled towards the prevailing wind. "We are going to war," commented Snape. "Do you feel courageous, Tabitha Penwright?" "War is fear cloaked in courage," Tabitha replied. "If one feels afraid, then that's the right question." And then she saw it, just as they began to pick up speed over Hogsmeade. It took Tabitha a few seconds to register what it was, but then once she had done so, horror took hold in her stomach. The dark mark. The mark of Voldemort. A mark so well known to all employees at the Ministry that sometimes after long shifts Tabitha went to bed thinking about it. There was no doubt what she had seen. "Hold on. You're going to come off." Snape's words were accompanied by a shuffling during which he pulled Tabitha's arms around him so that she was pulled up against the back of the wizard, the Death Eater, who was now flying her broom. Two thoughts now fought for primacy in her mind. The other was to get loose Snape as soon as she could when they got to the Ministry for Magic. 88,888,888. "Look, I told you it was 12:30, said Fred Weasley as he and his brother burst in on a deserted Mole Studies classroom. "I really wish you'd listen to me." George Weasley made a few furtive glances around the room just in case Ron or Harry or Hermione were lurking in the shadows. "And I'm sure he said 1:30, replied George, though with little conviction. "For all you know we're early and they're not here yet." Fred was about to reply when a voice rang out from the back of the classroom, faint but clear. "They've just left." Draco Malfoy took a few steps out of the shadow of the door behind which he was hiding as the Weasley twins hurried towards him. "Malfoy." Draco nodded. "Why are you in the Mole Studies classroom, and how do you know they've just left?" "Because I was here when they did," Draco replied. "Potter, Granger, your brother, Longbottom, Lovegood. All gone." "Merlin's bollocks!" exclaimed George aloud before joining his brother in glaring at Draco Malfoy. "And how come you know so much about it all, Malfoy? Did you try to stop them?" "I tried to stop Penright," said Draco truthfully. "As for the others, I couldn't give a scrat's ass about them." The punch came out of nowhere. As soon as Fred landed it, bringing Draco Malfoy to his knees, another soon followed courtesy of George. "You git!" yelled George as his fist came in contact with Draco's nose. "Why the hell did you come back here anyway? You should have stayed wherever the hell it was you were." "Seconded," shouted Fred, kicking Draco's legs and knocking him to his knees. "Where've they gone?" George Weasley shouted the question towards Draco's right ear, holding him around the neck. "To Ministry. Don't you know anything?" He choked as George squeezed. But Fred took a step back, looking at Draco Malfoy in horror. "Let him go, George." Fred dash. "They don't know." George let go of Draco and stood next to his brother, waiting for him to continue. "No. What?" spluttered Draco, trying to breathe though his compressed trachea. "Mrs. Furbisher's." "Mrs. Furbisher's what?" shouted Draco, staggering to his feet. "She's alive." "She's what?" George nodded at Fred, slapping him on the arm with the back of his hand as he realized the gravity of the situation, and they exchanged decisive looks. "Then they need to know," said Draco, pointing towards the classroom window. Hermione set up some brooms. "I think they're flying to London." "Thanks," shouted the Weasley twins as they legged it out of the classroom, the impact of Draco Malfoy giving them information not yet registering. They got to the courtyard and headed down the slope in the direction of Hagrid's hut and the owlery. "What are we going to do?" panted Fred as they got to the bottom of the brick tower through the top of which the odd owl flew in and out. "We won't be able to catch them if we fly now." "Come on," said George and began to run in the direction of the Forbidden Forest. "How's that going to help?" asked Fred. "What'll help us in there?" But George shook his head. "We've crossed the edge stones," he said, pointing to the arcing stones, no bigger than golf balls which circled away from them now and glowed ethereally. "So Umbridge'll know we've gone," concluded Fred. "But she won't know how?" Within a few seconds the twins dissipated, leaving behind a couple of cracks and a few wisps of smoke.